Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. It's an interesting topic, and hopefully it'll be sort of a thought-provoking debate, so let's see how we get on. So just at the outset, what's the rationale for intervention in acute Stanford type A aortic dissection? It's defined as with ascending aortic involvement, and clearly the evolution is rapid, and only a proportion of patients survive to surgery. So we need to always think about it in that context. It is to prevent intrapericardial aortic rupture and cardiac tamponade, and to mitigate further propagation of dissection, leading to malperfusion, causing organ or limb ischemia, and distal aortic rupture. So this is the premise of what we're setting out to do. And what's the principles of surgery for type A aortic dissection? It is to resect the intimal tear. The majority of tears occur at the level of the sinotubular junction or in the ascending aorta, to some extent in the aortic sinuses, and less often in the arch. It is to establish dominant antegrade true lumen flow, to preserve coronary perfusion, to restore aortic valve competence, to ensure adequate brain blood flow during surgery, and to minimize total body ischemia with hypothermia. So, operative strategies. Obviously, different people have different ways of doing things. I certainly have my own way. I prefer the right axillary artery for cannulation. This allows total body perfusion with antegrade dominant true lumen flow, and facilitates selective antegrade cerebral perfusion, and avoids the risks associated with femoral cannulation. I use hypothermic circulatory arrest and selective brain perfusion, coupled with cerebral oxygen saturation monitoring using near-infrared spectroscopy. I would aim to resect the intimal tear and reconstitute the distal aortic wall, and of course perform an open distal aortic anastomosis. Those within the arch, particularly within the vicinity on the inferior border, you can resect it in this process. You can preserve the coronary perfusion and restore the aortic valve competence in the proximal element of the operation, and of course one has to replace it if that needs to be done, and replace the root if that needs to be done as well. Just a word about right axillary artery cannulation. I tend to use an angled cannula, and I have done so the last 10 years since I've been back from New York, where I've sort of subscribed to the Dr. Greep School of Aortic Surgery. So it's a right angle cannula. It gives you excellent flows. It's safe and expeditious to put in. I've done large gentlemen with 6.8 liters flow without any problem. There is no foreign material there, and there is less chance for late wound site infections due to retained graft. So it works very well, and this is what I've used, and it's worked very well in almost all the cases. And this is how we do it. So the artery is dissected out. You can see that I've done a transverse arteriotomy, and the cannula goes in straight. It's expeditious. So one of the concerns of people doing axillary artery cannulation is always, oh, it takes time because you need to sew on a graft. Well, actually it doesn't, and you can even do it with permissive tamponade, where you've got a bit of blood in the pericardium where the pressure is sitting around 70. You can still get the access and just cut and put the pipe in. The advantage is you can then forget about it. You certainly have antegrade cerebral perfusion and total body perfusion to cool the patient down, and it works very well. And of course there are many ways of doing things, and this is just my way of doing it. So what are the insights into the IRAD data? For most people who know about it, it's quite obvious. For the rest, I'd say that it's International Registry of Aortic Dissection. It's held in sort of in Michigan, and it's a voluntary registry. And at the moment, we've got about 30 centers that put data into it from about 11 countries. And there is some interesting points to glean from it. So acute type A aortic dissection, if you look at the early outcomes over a 17-year period from 96 to 2013, the in-hospital mortality decreased from 31 to 22%. And this is probably largely due to the surgical mortality decreasing from 25 to 18%. It is still high, but then it includes all patients that come along. And this is the trend between 96 to 2013. And if you look at the midterm outcomes in papers that have come out of the IRAD data, that is in CIRC 2006, and I've taken a paper back to show how good it is at that stage. So between 96 and 2003, 70% of the patients were discharged alive after aortic dissection, having had all that done. Out of those patients, 96% are surviving at 1 year and 90% at 3 years. I think that is just outstanding. So what did they have done? 95% had ascending aortic replacement. Concomitant aortic root replacement was carried out in 32%. And arch replacement was performed only in 9.4% of those patients. So the bulk of the patients actually had a reasonably standardized approach. And if you look at these people, in the long term, what were the independent predictors of follow-up mortality? It was a history of atherosclerosis or previous cardiac surgery. And this is quite interesting because, think about it, if you had an operation and you survived it and you went out, your long-term prognosis is actually not that bad. Be it whether you came in with hypotension or shock, or you came in with compromise to kidney function, or with questionable neurological signs and symptoms, if you had the operation and you survived it, your long-term outcome is actually not that bad. So it is a good operation that we do, and we need to get this operation right. Okay. So the current evidence supports a consistent approach aided by refinements in operative strategy, use of adjuncts to improve hemostasis. That has been a sticking point over the decades, and that has improved with time. Non-porous grafts. We may think that this is a given. It wasn't the case many years ago. People were wrapping it up with all sorts of things, including graft inclusion techniques. We moved away from all that. We've got good grafts. We can do a good job with it. So direct, precise anastomosis is possible. Teflon buttress sutures. Glue, where appropriate. And in most cases, you will need to glue the two ends of the tone bits together. And of course, a protein. That's another contentious thing. We do have it in this country, so we can use it. And improved postoperative care. Not only immediate postoperative care, but also medical therapy in the long run to make sure that we've got the most desirable outcomes. All this makes a difference. And of course, serial follow-up imaging studies, where if you follow them up and there is a problem, then you can intervene. So if you've got the patient out of the theater alive and you follow them up in the long term, those that need intervention can be dealt with at that stage. Okay, what are the potential late issues? With every clinical decision we make, there is always a flip side to it. That's life. In the aortic root, what about recurrent aortic regurgitation? This can happen, and you have to deal with it. Pseudoaneurysm formation. Again, these things do occur. And what about the aortic arch in the descending thoracic aorta? Persistent false aneurysm, enlargement and or rupture. It's a problem. And that's one of the reasons why people thought we should be able to do even better than we are doing. And of course, with untreated arch and descending thoracic aorta tears, there's a potential for end organ ischemia with progression of chronic dissection. So these things are all there. So, what have people done about it? Extended aortic surgery has been done in many centers, certainly with a lot of interest in it. That's the standard operative technique of total arch replacement with reimplantation of the head and neck vessels, with or without an elephant trunk graft. This is that coupled with a frozen elephant trunk into the descending. And this is a hemi-arch replacement with the deployment of a stent separately into the descending under circulatory arrest, leaving the head and neck vessels connected as they were. And the fourth one is something that they do in UPenn, which is to debranch the head and neck vessels to the front and then come off bypass, and then under fluoroscopy guidance, get the stent in to get the right landing zone possible. So it's a nice way of classifying it, and I have to give credit to the authors who've sort of put these all together and classified them for people to understand it in a simplified way. But what are the limitations of this? This sort of extended aortic surgery is based on a surgeon team experience and resource availability. And a lot of data was collected in 2010 based on the International EVITA Registry. And this is despite expert centers performing surgery for acute type A aortic dissection with an aggressive approach. The mortality was 13% and the stroke rate was 10%. So it is not to be taken lightly, intervention on the arch. There is something to pay for it. And of course, it's difficult to disseminate the general application of surgical technique. So, to conclude, the mainstay of surgery for acute type A dissection is to save life. Now, extended aortic surgery would offer an incremental benefit, but it has to be balanced against the risks of disseminating the knowledge and also the reproducibility of the technique. Rapidity of access to surgery is the priority that has the most impact on outcome. And while it is great to think that we would like to have the aorta as close to the preoperative non-dissected state, one has to be pragmatic about these things. And replacement of the ascending aorta and resuspension of the aortic valve is still the best option. Not the only option, but still the best option to deliver a safe and predictable clinical outcome in a challenging situation. Thank you.